Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe told members of the Senate Intelligence Committee just yesterday, that's Tuesday, that it was up to Secretary Hegseth to determine whether the information he was posting was classified or not. Now, what was revealed was jaw-dropping in its specificity and includes the type of information that is kept to a very close hold to protect the operational security of a military strike.
Okay, so you're here because you want to know what's going on, right? You want to understand complex stuff,
Yeah.
but you don't want to wade through a ton of information.
You want the bottom line.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what we do here. We deep dive into the sources, we break it down, and we tell you what matters.
What really matters.
Today, we're deep diving into some really interesting messages that were published by The Atlantic, and they are from a Signal chat group, that encrypted messaging app,
Right.
involving some very high-level officials, including Pete Hegseth, the former defense secretary during the Trump administration.
Right.
And they're talking about a potential military strike
Yes.
against the Houthis in Yemen. And this is super interesting because, well, first of all, why are they talking about this on Signal?
Yeah, I mean, was it classified? Was it not classified? What exactly were they talking about?
Right.
That's what we're going to get into. And especially because it happened right before the strikes took place.
Right.
It raises a lot of questions.
So that's our mission today. We're going to look at the messages themselves. We're going to look at different perspectives from various news sources like CNN, Fox News, and also back to The Atlantic.
Right.
And we're going to really try to understand the context of this.
Yeah, like how did this happen?
Right, exactly.
And what does it mean?
Okay, so let's start with these breaking news reports, right? The Atlantic publishes these Signal chat messages. They're immediately picked up by all the major news outlets, and everybody is talking about them.
And the big question is why?
Why?
Right. I mean, why is this such a big deal?
Right.
Well, I think the timing is huge here.
Yes.
The fact that this information comes out just before the strikes themselves really adds a whole different layer
It really does.
to what was being said in those chats.
And the messages themselves are really something. Hegseth, he's giving very specific times. He's saying 2:10 more F-18S launch,
Wow.
And he says 2:15 strike drones on target, right?
Real-time updates.
Real time. And he even says, and this is a direct quote, this is when the first bombs will definitely drop, pending earlier trigger-based targets.
Wow. So specific.
And later at 12:15, he mentions the first launch of F-18s. Again, he says, this is when the first bombs will definitely drop.
So he's doubling down on the timing.
Right.
I mean, it's remarkable how precise he's being.
And he mentions being currently clean on OPSET, which indicates like an active awareness of the operation.
Yeah,
Right?
very much in the moment.
So this all leads to a really central question, or debate even.
Right.
Were these war plans? Were they strike plans? What's the difference?
Well, that's what everybody's trying to figure out.
Right.
You have the Trump administration, people like Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe, and they're saying, no classified information was shared. These were not war plans.
Right.
But then you have other people, you have news outlets, The Atlantic, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, the level of detail here, the timing, the types of aircraft involved, that sounds an awful lot like a strike plan, if not part of a larger war plan.
It does.
What exactly is going on here?
And even Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic,
Yeah.
he hesitated to publish everything. He said he was concerned about national security.
Yeah, and he's, a seasoned journalist. He understands these things.
Exactly.
So the fact that he hesitated is telling.
And he only published more because the administration kept denying that any of this was classified.
So they sort of call his bluff in a way.
Right.
And it's interesting, too, that The Atlantic still withheld the name of a CIA employee.
Oh, yeah.
So there are still some lines they weren't willing to cross.
And the reaction, oh my gosh, the reactions to this have been fascinating.
Yeah.
The White House, they were not happy. Apparently, Caroline Leavitt emailed The Atlantic and said, we don't want this out there. But then top national security officials are daring The Atlantic to publish? I mean, what is going on?
Yeah, that's kind of strange, isn't it?
It's really strange.
Like a mixed message.
It is.
But it also maybe tells you a little bit about how they were trying to manage this situation. Maybe they figured if they acted like it wasn't a big deal,
Right.
it would blow over.
Okay, well, let's look at Tulsi Gabbard's statement.
Okay.
She says, okay, yeah, it was a mistake to add the reporter to the chat.
Right?
But she insists that no classified information, no sources, no methods, no locations, and no war plans were shared.
Right.
And she basically says, look, this is just a standard update to the National Security Cabinet.
Standard.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that she's trying to frame it that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's no big deal, just routine business. But, I mean, come on. The level of detail here, the real-time updates, that's pretty unusual, wouldn't you say?
I would say so.
It seems like they're trying to downplay the significance of what was actually shared.
And then there's John Ratcliffe,
Yeah.
the CIA director.
Right.
He says that it was really up to Secretary Hegseth to decide if the information was classified. And later he talks about spending 4 hours answering senators' questions,
Yeah.
Denying that he transmitted any classified information or revealed an undercover operative.
So he's on the defensive.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
And he even points to President Trump's public statements that the Houthis would face consequences.
Right. So he's saying, look, this was all out in the open anyway.
Right.
But I think it's important to note the difference between a general warning, there will be consequences,
Right.
and then sharing the actual timing of a strike.
Right, exactly.
That's a whole different level of information.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about what happened before the strike. Let's talk about what happened after, because it gets even more interesting.
Okay, what happened?
Reportedly, after the strike had happened, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz started sharing some, they call it extraordinarily sensitive information.
In the same chat.
In the same chat.
Yeah.
He talked about a building collapsing, he mentioned a top missile guy being killed, and praised the intelligence community and Central Command.
Wow.
So this just further muddies the waters, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, if they were so sure that nothing before the strike was classified,
Right.
then why are they sharing these very specific details about the outcome?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Targeting individuals, that's usually pretty sensitive stuff.
Very sensitive.
It just doesn't add up.
So what does this all tell us?
Well, I think it raises some big questions, right?
It does.
Like, what is the difference between a war plan and a strike plan?
Huge question.
And if this wasn't classified, why was everybody so worried about it getting out?
Right.
Why did they try to stop the Atlantic from publishing?
It's almost like they were more worried about the public perception than actual security breaches. Maybe. And I mean, think about the fact that a journalist was accidentally included in this chat.
Oh, man. Yeah.
That's a huge security risk, isn't it?
It is. It really shows you how vulnerable these communication channels can be, even when they're encrypted.
Especially when you're talking about real-time operational detail.
Right. It's not just about the technology. It's about the people and the processes. I mean, there are guidelines for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, they even offered guidance on using these kinds of apps.
Right.
So somebody dropped the ball here.
Big time. So basically, the administration is saying, we didn't share any classified war plans.
Yeah.
But what the Atlantic published paints a very different picture.
Right.
And it raises some very serious concerns about how they handle sensitive information.
Absolutely. And I think regardless of whether you call it a war plan or a strike plan,
Right.
what this shows us is that the line between transparency and operational security is getting blurrier and blurrier. And in this case, it seems like operational security might have taken a back seat.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap this up, I want you to think about this. What is the public's right to know?
Right.
Where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that sensitive information is handled responsibly, especially in today's hyper-connected world?
Especially when you've got everybody on their phones all the time talking about everything.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another one.
See you then.
Until then, stay informed.
And stay curious.
Very curious.